Going to take that right hand and we're going to just slowly bring it all the way down as safely as we can to drop that hand down. We're lifting the left hand up. We're dropping that right hand down towards your ankle, reaching all the way up. And now your left hand is going up and you're looking back at your thumb. And I am in alignment with my assignment. And I know that because I can feel it in my core and nothing can stop or shake or destroy my mind and my spirit. It is so much greater than what is in front of me. Everything in front of me is temporary and I am present. I'm gonna start lifting up nice and slowly, bringing that right arm all the way up, turning your head back to your right, looking at your right hand in front of you. You should be back to a balance, both arms are out. And you're gonna slowly taking that breath. And as you release it, bring your arms back down to your side, nice and slowly. We're going to turn ourselves right back facing this computer or telephone or whatever you're in front of. Take another deep breath in. And if you have any water nearby, go ahead and get a nice little swig because, again, you need to lubricate your mind and your body after taking all this information. We need to remember that we are a part of this environment. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for taking that breath. Thank you for taking that moment to stretch. Thank you for getting that water in. Let's move on. So now how does this affect you as an adult? Because we looked at it from the child perspective. In the center here, you see as an individual, that's you right there in the middle. It doesn't matter what age you are. I don't care if you are a baby or a senior, you are the individual. But what impacts you and influences you is what's in your surrounding area. So once you step outside of who you are and you're interacting with your family, your spouse, you may have communal living. You have other folks that are in other rooms in your household. You got to think about their tensions and their devices and what they're bringing in and out of the element, whether they're on a phone. What they're consuming is not just a conversation. What they're consuming is not just a food. It's what they're putting into their thoughts. All this energy is shared in your space constantly. And as soon as you exit your home, now you're out in the community. You're looking at the school, you're looking at the church, your peers, what's going on at work, what's happening at the community center, what's happening at, all that is outside. So you're bringing that outside into the family, back into yourself. So this is 3 layers. And then we're doing it on a larger level. We're watching the news and the media, social media platforms. All of that too is affecting the way that we regulate our emotional space. Like for instance, I hear that there's things happening on TV through my peers and family association, and I'm just almost devastated because I can't digest all that. That's too much overload for me. I'm just trying to get through this part here. I'm just getting into the 3rd ring. I can't go outside that 3rd ring because outside that 3rd ring, I can't control that. That's outside of me. So that's going to stress my levels up even more, especially if I'm already a caregiver or I'm a provider. Whatever my role is in the community, I'm stretching myself. And if you're talking about social norms, you're looking at racism and you're looking at microaggression and you're looking at what's happening to our brothers and sisters on the street. What those things I just said that is happening on the street is flooded in our media. So we're digesting that. It's just like the making of a slave. If you watched and you witnessed that generationally, you got another problem on your hand. So this is what Bronfenbrenner's theory was really about, was these influences within our community. They have an impact on us from outside all the way to within. And our biggest thing we have no control over is oppression. And oppression is also a state of consciousness as much as it is inflicted upon us. And that is about social economics. What we don't hear about is environmental racism. That's something that's new on the table. This is outside of my research, and I want to bring this to the table because we're most likely, as Indigenous people, no matter which region or which continent we are representing, we're more likely to live near contaminated air, water, and soil. And so you see the numbers here that 56% of our population live near toxic waste. I got to see that when I was in Namibia and in South Africa. The shanty towns are near the dump grounds, the landfills, and they're polluted. And these folks are bringing these environmental dump things and creating home structures from it and do not know how contaminated it is. And then you see here that 95% of these claims of polluters are denied by EPA. And EPA is not just in America. This is all over the world that are actually regulating what's happening in the environment. Outside of that, you have nitrogen dioxide, which is coming from our factories and vehicles. And then you also have 2 times more of that in the it says here, without potable water and modern sanitation. So this is just a little side note from the nation that is giving us this information that we need to be aware of. This is all in the background. Like, this is the stuff that we're not seeing on the news. And today's water level definitely smell a little bit more harsh than usual here in Sacramento. I noticed that I can smell more chlorine than usual. And I was just washing my hands. I didn't notice it when I was taking my shower, but I did notice it when I was washing my hands. So back to this trauma and the social location. When the original study was put together, they were like, okay, so we understand that the higher your score, you have an earlier death. And then, we have all these burdens of the diseases that we're just talking about, and we have more options of, based on our lifestyles and how active or non-active we are, determines the health risk and the behaviors. Then we have, again, the social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. So it's like, the higher your score, the earlier you are to death. What they didn't factor in was something that came out in 2015. And this was out of Richmond, California. What they did not include was 2 more categories. This study was based on 42,000, or is it 70,000? I think it was between 42 and 70,000 participants in San Diego, which happened to be predominantly European. Areas middle class lifestyle. They're not experiencing the same levels of microaggression, implicit bias, epigenetics, and the other social structures that are constantly happening, which includes the generational embodiment and historical trauma. Those things are not accounted for. And the rise that came up with this right there in the Bay Area, they're like, yeah, this is a cute little study, but what about these other things that need to be factored in? So let's look at where we are on this spectrum of disparity is based on poverty. And because we are stuck in limited opportunities, we don't have an equal playing field. And because we don't have an equal playing field, our mass media across all structures are forcing us to look at things that are very obvious, like racism, right? We see that on the news constantly. We see who's being attacked the most. We also see disparity within our politicians. We also see in our religious sectors. We also see it by gender biases. There's so many things that divide us to keep us focused on where the ball is. We're watching where the ball is landed, but we're forgetting about this part over here, which is our Maslow's theory, which is that we need to remember our basic needs. We need to get back to how do we make sure our basic needs are being accounted for? How well do we feel those things are being taken in consideration with our physical wellness, being safe, being loved, our esteem, and then our self-actualization is really about being our best. And how do we keep that level of creativity? What are we doing to continue to operate at our higher levels of consciousness? That goes back to what I said before about what we're consuming. And we're consuming things that are not necessarily healthy for us, they're toxic. And it goes back to the slide that I showed right here. So if this is in your environment and you're trying to get right here, that could take a while. And now let's take a look at what else can be impacting and influencing this trauma. As you see this man's head dropped and he's got his prayer beads, we're in the biggest amount of stress than we've ever experienced, not just as individuals, but as a huge collective. More than usual amounts of anxiety and depression are just circulating around us constantly. And if you're sharing space with someone else in your household and you don't even know how to address them or help them because you don't know what those behaviors are, as we just took that assessment, we don't know how much baggage people are showing up in our lives. And this includes our children. When they're going back to school, they're bringing in and out constantly something. Even if you're a caregiver, a grandparent, these people are bringing things in and out. They're bringing energy. And that's a nice way to describe it. They're bringing energy in and out of your environment. And you're on defense and you're protecting and trying to keep everything safe and calm and balanced. It's a lot of work. So here, we're going to look at this image. And you see 3 levels here of a woman. And you see in her belly, she is a parent. And so genetically, we have something that we are projecting and giving with or without our efforts. And it's based on how we are taking that experience in. So in my research and what's coming out the pipeline is very recent information is about epigenetics and trauma. And that was mentioned earlier when I was showing you the diagrams. And epigenetics is really based upon genetic marks that register in a person's genes from previous generations. This is toxic stress. It produces a chemical response based on varying experiences of trauma over time. Traumatic experiences can have such a great impact on children because they have little control over what happens, unlike adults. An example of epigenetics trauma would be historical and generational trauma like slavery in the United States. And that came out in 2019. So for epigenetics to really change, to really be inherited, you have to have rewritten every generation. And right now, what we have in front of us are great grandchildren and beyond, and we don't know how clearly that damage is affecting them genetically, but we know those markers are there. So if you watch The Making of a Slave, and that went on for 4 or 5 generations, we're still clearing out that. And they're saying that in this next slide, they're saying that before, in the past, when a mother is pregnant and the 2 parents come together, that is a fresh slate for that baby coming in. But now they're shedding more light on understanding whether or not the parental epigenetic markers are influenced by offspring's health, disease, susceptibility. This is a new term called transgenerational epigenetics, about the inheritance and the interuterine exposure. So whatever that parent has been exposed to on both sides. See, in that last image, I just showed you the mother. We're not even factoring in what the father has incurred and what he's bringing, because he's the planting of the seed. The mother is carrying, but he's the planter of the seed. Without that seed, that egg does not get fertilized. So here you're bringing these two beings together, and now you have that whole germination that's occurring, and that all happens scientifically. And so you can either choose to stick with the narrative or rewrite and break the cycle, is where we are when you look at maybe the 3rd generation and 4th generation down. Then you start becoming more selective in your process of who you're picking as your mate. Now, believe it or not, our environment really does matter. And here is all the things that are happening around us that are constant. And even if you're not taking it in, it's still in your environment. It also, what should have been included in here is our cell phones. What should have been included in here is our televisions, our laptops. We're still soaking up so much energy, even the blue rays as we're sitting here right now. If unless you set settings on your phone and on your computer to reduce the number of blue rays, then you don't know how much of that exposure, by the time you go to sleep, you're wondering why your mind is still so fired up. It's because, again, we're soaking up so much of it, but we're not getting as outdoors as much. And now we're going into a state of shock as we're exiting and going back into work and school. And we don't feel as protected or as safe as we've been in this lockdown state of condition that's been on a global level. So what we need to look at here in order to break some of the cycle of trauma is to understand how it actually works. We have evidence that when you have punishment, punishment brings on trauma. And when trauma incurs, we get emotional and psychological damage, and then we have behavior problems. Oh, I misspelled that. Okay, so then that then becomes again part of the cycle when it hasn't been broken, and then that cycle continues upon another cycle. And then what happens is 4 and 5 generations later, we're still responding the same way 4 or 5 generations did when it came to handling basic affairs. We're being forced to get back to school and back to work, but we haven't unraveled the way that we are seeing everything in perspective. So trauma changes the brain. And this just came out this year because the medications that were created were not necessarily made for us. So our bodies and our DNA are responding differently to these medications, where people are having more adverse side effects that are bringing on more health issues than they started out with, like diabetes, hypertension.